Right. Good evening. I'd like to call to order this business meeting of the Tacoma School District Board of Directors, Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. General Counsel, would you please call the roll?
Yes, good evening. President Hines.
Here.
Vice President Cobb.
Here.
Director Leon.
Here.
Director Bonbright. And I believe Director Bonbright's on the call.
Here. Yep. Sorry.
Hello.
Hi.
And Director Keating.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All righty. Thank you. Item number 3, adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
I motion to adopt the agenda.
I
Is there a
second. I'll second it.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. All right, as we continue under these unusual circumstances, item number 4 on the agenda, Superintendent's Report. And this evening, the Superintendent is going to give us an update on COVID-19. Superintendent.
Yes, good to see you this evening. I'll make this update brief. We've got a substantial agenda. I'll just review a couple of things. We continue to serve about 80,000 meals a week and continue to serve about approximately 177 students in our daycare sites. Shout out to Amanda Scott Thomas, who is our community partner administrator, and she continues to step up. So many local efforts have been coming into her, asking her how they can help, and she's connecting people with resources. One example is that every week, World Vision Faith Community food distribution, we have school counselors, family liaisons, social workers, and staff that are picking up meals that we're delivering to students and going to areas in our district where people don't have transportation. They can't get to any of the sites. So a shout out to that. And we've heard back that the families are so appreciative. So that's daycare and food. Our teachers continue in the learning front are focusing on addressing the new priority standards in their virtual instruction and their distance learning. We've seen great examples and creative ways of engaging students in instruction. Now that we're getting into that, just past the point where it's brand new and people are really trying to settle it and get this done. Marie Verhar and her teaching and learning group have just released 3 more weeks of learning, and they were distributed to meal sites on April 13th. And packet 4 is under construction and will take us out to the end of the year. And of course, those resources are still available online. One of the needs that's come up through Amanda Scott Thomas is that we have a lot of parents that are saying, hey, we need school supplies. We need, just basic supplies to accomplish some of these tasks. So Amanda, again, is working in collaboration with the Partnership Office to help make available those supply kits at our meal sites. And we think it'll happen in the next couple of weeks. One of our ongoing challenges has been working with our partners to secure additional devices. So we have lots of partners that are working on doing that. And I've got potentially great news that's going to happen soon. We're not ready to announce yet, but we expect that we're going to be able to announce that we've got a productive, collaborative partner that's going to help us get some internet access. So that is going to be exciting when we release that. Some people have asked about, how is it going for ELL students? What's happening there? And so Manon gave me a cheat sheet, and the ELL department meets once a week with all the teachers, and they talk about best approaches and new strategies to provide online language learning opportunities to our students. Their primary goal is to ensure 2 things: that English language development is embedded, in those lessons, and that also that they're pairing it with our work that our regular ed teachers do. So they're developing and designing embedded English language supports for their regular ed colleagues, and they're offering instruction to ELs on their own website or another appropriate platform. The department has been providing online resources for teachers to use and has also assisted them with lesson planning. And so they're really working together solid as a group, collaborating to come up with this really good instruction. And the license-based online program, Imagine Learning, is available now to all English language teachers, students. Also, our district bilingual staff, classified staff, has been able to help with translation. So in cases where we've really needed translation between parents and students and teachers, we've had our classified bilingual staff meeting that need. And also, some of our ELL teachers are using a translation app like ClassTag that communicates with parents in their home language. And so we also have been, if you have a message that you want it translated from English to Spanish, from a partner, you can get that done. So you can see they've made a lot of progress in a little bit of time towards serving our youngsters. With our special education, the story is actually the same. We're going to really go into it in a future board meeting. So right now, I'll just say that our special education teachers continue to make regular contact with our students. They're checking in, they're focusing on efforts that will help those individual students and working very closely with them. So you can see all up and down these different endeavors that we're working on, that it includes, we wouldn't be making it without our partners. So I want to just take this opportunity one more time. I know I say it a lot, but I think it's important that people remember that it takes the Tacoma community to pull this off. And please continue to work with us and reach out if you need assistance. If you're working and you're really trying to get something to work and it's not working for you, let us know so that we can be a part of the solution. I really believe that our success in this endeavor totally depends on our ability to work together. So we want to reach out and make sure we make that offer. That's it.
Ready. Thank you, Carla. Are there questions or comments for the superintendent's COVID-19 update? Vice President Cobb?
No, I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Leone, questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate your discussion on all those topics, specifically the special education students, what the regular outreach is looking like. You're going to give us more report in a few weeks, I understand, but it's going well. So congratulations to all those teachers and paras and staff that are doing that. And the ELL piece was something that was important for constituents to hear and families to understand how it relates to these students that are learning English, but also I think it's really important for those kids that may know English, but their parents don't know English. So I think that tools that you talked about, ClassTag, is that what it's called?
ClassTag is one platform. Actually, there's several. So you have some ELL teachers that are using a variety of platforms to help communicate. And then one of the things that's been really helpful are our classified paras that know the language so that they can translate. And, they know the students, so that makes a really tight relationship. So that's been good.
Thank you. So we focus in on equity a lot in this district. So I think that is shows how much we're doing for those folks. A lot of times those are the people that are going to be left behind if we don't make special accommodations. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Director Bombright, any questions or comments?
Nope, I think my comments will be coming probably later in the agenda, but thank you, Superintendent, for keeping us posted, and it all sounds like it's finally falling into place and moving forward.
Yeah, and I should make sure I say it's not perfect. We certainly have people that are frustrated out there on both sides. I heard from a mom today who has 3 students that says, whoa, it's too much. And so that's why I've said, reach out, if it's too much and you need to dial it back a little bit, let us know. So that's important.
Thank you. Director Keating, any questions or comments?
No, I don't have any questions there, other than I'm really pleased to hear about the translation progress that's being made. So thank you for that.
Alrighty, thank you. Superintendent, I appreciate the report. We'll move on in the agenda to item number 5, members of the public wishing to address the board. At our last business meeting, General Counsel provided the background for this new public comment process, and we're going to continue to abide by it. Those that are wishing to provide formal comment now need to do so in written form and submit that statement to the board secretary 24 hours prior to the start of the meeting. And then that becomes a part of the official record, and the board and the superintendent will respond as necessary. Superintendent, do we have any public comments submitted this evening?
There were no comments submitted.
Okay, thank you. We move on to the agenda to item number 6, essential matters. I'll remind the board and the public that under guidance from the State Attorney General's office, we are only able to meet and discuss items deemed essential. And so we've added an extra filter as Vice President Cobb and I work with the superintendent to put the agenda together. We want to make certain that it abides by those guidelines provided by the Attorney General. Item 6.1, approval of minutes. 6.1A, approval of minutes of March 12th, 2020 and March 27th, 2020 school board meetings.
I so move.
I second.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Item 6.2, policy matters. 6.2A, the first and second reading revision to policy 6973, acceptable use of digital resources. General Counsel.
Yes, the General Counsel recommends that the board revise policy 6973, acceptable use of digital resources.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt?
I so move.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Are there questions or comments on the policy? Let me start by asking General Counsel or the superintendent to provide some context around this policy, and then specifically, it isn't often that we do a first and second reading in the same business meeting, but why we believe that that's important in order to support this policy.
Renee?
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. And I'm here representing both myself and our Chief Information Officer, Ed Gracia. Ed and his amazing team worked with the legal team with our number one priority is keeping students safe. We work very hard in the district to keep our students safe in our physical environment at our schools, and we also need to have the same commitment to keep students safe in the virtual environment. Ed and his team have worked closely with Microsoft. We have an enterprise use agreement with Microsoft that addresses the special concerns of student computing. There are particular laws that are designed to protect students and those under the age of 18, and also their privacy. And so because we have that agreement in place with Microsoft, it allows the use of the Teams environment, which is the platform we're using for this meeting here today. It allows us to have more security around using that with students. So based upon that security evaluation and that safety evaluation, we are proposing to amend our acceptable use of digital resources policy to allow for video conferencing with students. The caveat being that we only have the approved use of Microsoft Teams. We've looked at some other platforms. I'm sure you've seen in the news that there's concerns about some other platforms, and we also don't have agreements with other platforms. So we think it's important to make sure that we're still putting student safety in front and have safeguards in place. So in addition to those technological safeguards, we've also done some configuring for the video platforms that will help prevent safety issues and ensure that we have a positive and professional environment virtually for students. Things like preventing students from being able to share their screen, preventing students from being able to initiate a meeting, only being able to join a meeting that their teacher has initiated, having restrictions around the use of district-issued technology and district purposes to initiate a meeting, and ensuring that parents are aware and can opt out if they don't want their student to participate in a virtual meeting. And finally, I'd also like to thank all of Carla's Superintendent Santorno's team. We worked really hard to put together a training for teachers that with your approval of this policy, we will have teachers take this training through our Safe Schools platform on the do's and don'ts of video conferencing with students before they initiate any video conferences. So with that, I recommend that also, I think the other point was why to fast track. And I think that we received guidance from OSPI now last week as well, supporting the use of video conferencing for students. We've also leveraged resources with our insurer, the Washington Schools Risk Management Pool, followed their guidelines. And so with the need to expedite student connection, we're making the recommendation that that the board pass this policy revision tonight.
I
Thank
have
you.
a question.
I appreciate the due diligence. I know that the board, at least for the last couple of weeks, if not longer, have been receiving communication formally and informally from members of the public, families, students, teachers, urging the use of Microsoft Teams and the video chat platform. And I know, the board has taken that into consideration while we do our due diligence through that fiduciary responsibility to make certain that it gets deployed safely. So I appreciate how quickly you and your team have been able to look into the legalities of it, and superintendent ensuring that students have an expectation of how to use Microsoft Teams, and that staff has an expectation of how to use Teams, and that we're providing the professional development to help for the effective use. Are there any questions or comments on this policy? Director Bombright.
Yes, I've had several constituents basically saying that one of the problems that they have with Microsoft Teams is that it only shows 4 squares at a time. And I just know you've been working with them on this issue. And is there a different platform within Microsoft Teams, or is there a way that the teacher can have the whole class on a screen like you can with some of the other products that are out there? That's one.
Yeah, that's a great question, Director Bonbright. Ed Gracia, our Chief Information Officer, and I had a conference today on this subject, and he shared that Microsoft has announced that they have several upgrades in process for Teams. You've already probably noticed the upgrade of the new backgrounds that they've deployed. They have another upgrade that should be coming out very soon that will allow 9 squares to be seen. So a little more of a Brady Bunch kind of look. We'll get up to 9 squares. I know it's not as many people as is available with Zoom, and we just have had to do the risk to reward assessment with Zoom. And I've been on Zoom. It does allow more people, but there are so many safety and security concerns with Zoom bombing that has occurred. They don't have the privacy protections in place for student data and student information that at this point in time, we're sticking solely to Teams. But Ed has committed as well that he and his team are going to look at some other options that may have the heightened safety and security precautions that we're looking for. I know they're going to look at Cisco's platform as well as GoToMeeting.
And thanks for that. That really helps. My second question was, you said that parents will have a choice as to whether or not their students participate via the video chat. However, if it's a video, because they're afraid of the video process, is there a way, as there is on, I believe, that you can just turn off the video and the student would still be able to participate with the microphone? Is that still an option for us to use?
Absolutely. Sometimes there's philosophical or religious concerns about images. You could totally participate just with a microphone. The other part that we've encouraged teachers and staff as well is if a student or their family choose not to participate in the video conferencing, to make sure that student, again, equity being first and foremost, equity and accessibility, find another way to connect with the student in an appropriate manner so that they don't feel that they're being left out.
Thank you.
Vice President Cobb, do you have any questions or comments?
Director Bonbright kind of hit one of the questions I had, so I'm good. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Director Keating, any questions or comments?
No, I would say Director Brombright kind of asked the questions I had as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Leone, any questions or comments?
Yes, thanks, Renee. Thank you for making also the comment and the discussion around equity, because that is the other reason we have not rolled this out quickly. We've been discussing how we get information to our kids that don't have access to devices. So we know that there's still going to be kids that are not going to be able to access those devices, but we made the decision as a group that we want to reach more kids this way. And then we know that the district is also having the teachers do extra, reach out and try to get those kids engaged, whether it's through a call or an email, to re-engage them privately. So just so the public knows, we know that this isn't going to reach everyone. That's it.
Thank you. I would just add, as we think about long-term implications of distant learning, and we get requests for certain platforms to be explored, this policy is not specific to Microsoft Teams, right? This is applicable to technological use. And so I just want to make certain that there is that differentiation, that this is a broad policy to allow the superintendent to come back with technological recommendations as we hear from our teachers and students and members of the community of platforms that might help better facilitate learning, that this will give the latitude to for those products to be vetted, and that we're not just simply narrowly approving Windows Teams, but this has the potential to have broad application.
Yes, absolutely. This policy that you'd be passing tonight does not make a specific reference to Microsoft Teams. What it refers to is approved technology by the district. And the Chief Information Officer, Ed Gracia, and his team, along with Malik Benro from my team, Assistant General Counsel, have a committee that reviews applications for technology and different technology that teachers may want to use with students. So there's a process that exists within the district to vet technology, and then something like the Microsoft enterprise agreement that also goes through legal. We work to make sure that it's an approved vendor. So what the policy does is says that we will include video conferencing as one of the forms of acceptable technology on a platform that is approved by the district. And then we have a process that we can vet and approve different platforms.
Great, thank you for providing that clarification. Are there any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 5-0. Item 6.3, budget update.
I would ask our Chief Financial Officer, Rosalind Medina, to guide us through the discussion about the budget. Rosalind?
Good evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And as Tom pulls up my presentation, I really have an intent this evening to just provide you with a few updates on not just where we have been in our finances, but also our current implications around COVID, what the legislature has finally approved, and then just give you a brief look into what we are expecting for the future. You want to go ahead and go to that first slide, Tom? This is a projection for where we anticipate our year end as of March. So basically through our close of March, what we think our year end will look like. And it's a prediction into the future. So it's to be taken with somewhat of a grain of salt. This was before any of the COVID implications really took effect. The good news here is that we are seeing our revenues coming in at about 99% of our budget, 89.9% of what we budgeted, which is pretty much our typical trend around revenues. And our expenditures for March were at 99.6%. What that left us with in March was a fund balance that would exceed the 5%. If you recall, We went through some very tough times during last year's budget cycle when we were building the 1920 budget, the budget that we're currently in now and expending from. And we made some very significant cuts. We anticipated bringing our fund balance down to right around the 5%. And so this would actually give us just a little bit more than that, somewhere around 6% of our fund balance. So we're saving a little better in the beginning of this year before the COVID has hit. And I think that's great news that the systems that we put in place for all of the reductions last year are coming to fruition, and we're seeing the fruits of that work. And we're not overexpending or finding ourselves in a difficult position. We're right on target for where we wanted to be for the 1920 year. If you'll go to that next slide for me, please. I think it's important to also note that our fund balance is meant for emergencies. We do set a reserve policy by the board. Our board has decided our reserve should be at 5% annually at the end of the year, and that's 5% of our revenues. Those reserves are generally set aside for emergencies, extraordinary events, and of course, so that we can say that we're in a good financial position when we go out for things like selling bonds, which we will be doing shortly. There is an internal goal that we set that's somewhere between 5 and 8%. We don't like to go below that 5% threshold, not just because of board policy, but because we do require the cash flow of those reserves to help us get through some of our more difficult months. We have expenditures that occur all through the year, but our revenues come in staggered times. And so it's important for us to have resources on hand so that we don't have to borrow money in March, as an example, when we don't receive a significant amount of apportionment or tax revenues. We'll go to that next slide, Tom. With COVID, there's of course going to be financial implications. And so those disruptions will occur in both our revenue and our expenditure areas. And I've listed out a few things here that we're tracking. We're going through our entire financial structure and looking at each program and trying to identify if there are COVID impacts for the current year that we need to address immediately. Some of the things that we're seeing right away are our special education safety net funding. We have 2 less months of school, and so services are provided in a different manner. That has an implication on our application for those grant funds or grant reimbursements. Our enrollment has been repopulated at the state level, so our apportionment will largely be intact. That's good news for us. We did get some tax deferrals from the county. We don't expect that those are going to have a significant deficiency or impact on our ability to manage our finances at this point, but we're watching those closely. We do have a loss of daily student meal revenues and some refunds that we're providing for tuition or rentals or facilities. Some of our vendors are unable to provide business services, and so we have some rent disruption as it relates to those activities. And then at the federal level, we're seeing that there's a number of unknowns. There are requirements and compliance issues that we're trying to work through and understand the implications of whether that has a financial impact on us, as well as our USDA. We're not receiving the everyday student meals, but at the same time, we are handing out a number of meals. I think Carla said 80,000 a week for students that are in need now, and we'll be receiving revenues for those meals that we're distributing. So there's some ins and outs as we're going through this. And then from an expenditure perspective, we are expending on the daycare and the meal service and the other littler impact items, like we'll have less travel, we'll have fewer materials that we need to buy over the next several months, we'll have less gas needs, our utilities will potentially decline, and so we're trying to track and monitor how those will help or hurt us. You want to progress, Tom? What we're making sure to do as we're identifying these potential areas is identify if there's a mitigation option. As of right now, what we can absolutely start on, and we have, is reducing any costs that we can in the current year. We want to make sure that we can control costs that we have the ability to control and really start to think about our revenues and our expenditures very carefully. We're going to be seeking the USDA reimbursement for our meals. We're also working with OSPI and the federal government to find any kind of exemptions or flexibilities in waivers so that we can use resources differently, so we can try to be smart with our resources. We have processed our application for FEMA, and we will be attending a application, like initiation training or webinar next week. We're working to align our current costs to available funding. And really what I mean by that is if we have excess resources in a grant like Title I or Title IV, then we would try to move current expenditures in to use up those resources, as we may not have as much flexibility and carryover, and try to save some of those more flexible resources for later when we may need them during the economic downturn that comes along with the shutdown. We will be seeking insurance claims if we're eligible for any. We haven't found any so far, but just to know that that's one of the options out there. And then if we have to, and we get to a point where it's a struggle, we may have to use fund balance as a last resort to make sure, but we have to make sure that we're within our budgeted expenditure guidelines. So if it looks as though we may exceed our expenditure guidelines for the year, of course, we will come back to the board. We would have to do a revision to our budget in that scenario. You'll go to that next slide, please. Moving into then what the state legislative impacts are. The state finished their legislation in March, end of March, and it was a relatively brief session. They finished on time. They were in relative agreement as it came to the budget. They did not have a lot of resources, and they did not provide a lot of resources. There were a few items that the governor vetoed, which I'll talk about on our next slide. But these are all the things that were implemented during this budget cycle, this legislative cycle. The implicit price deflator, which is a cost of living adjustment, was set at 1.6%, which is a little lower than what we anticipated. So there was a little good news story in that. The SEB, which is the School Employee Benefit Board program, that's our benefits, our health benefit. The cost per person per month was reduced from $1,059 down to $1,000. So there's a savings in the staff that are already receiving those benefits. We don't have to pay as much per month to provide those benefits on their behalf. A negligible pension increase, the material supplies, operating costs, and 1 day of professional development for teachers. We have a slight increase in revenue associated with that. And then the last two are related. If you'll recall that we lost a significant portion of our levy in the 2019 calendar year. And the loss of that has hit two budget years, the 18-19 and the 19-20 year, where we're in the middle of that now. Next year, as we hit to the 2020 and 2021 year, we will have an increase in our levy because we'll be able to collect more for a longer period of time than we have been able to. That has an impact. So this is not a new legislative change, but it is a legislatively addressed issue that we are receiving this new revenue for that. And then the hold harmless was resources that the state provided us to help us while we were seeing the decline in our levy. And those resources will be going away because we'll be able to recapture levy dollars. And Tom, if you'll move on real quick. The vetoed items that the governor vetoed, and he was very clear in his messaging around the vetoes that these are not just easy decisions for him to make and not easy decisions for anyone who worked hard to try and secure these resources for schools. But these were all new monies that were added into the budget that were then eliminated based on the need to save resources, seeing a potential fiscal crisis coming. And those, I don't need to belabor the point and spend too much time on them. They were all new monies that we were going to be receiving, and we would have to set up new programming around. We're not going to be getting those resources, and we won't be setting up any programming around them. And then moving on to future predictions. You know, this is likely going to be a turbulent time over the next several years. We have heard from a number of our legislators that we can expect that, Tom, are you moving us to the next slide? Sorry. That you can expect for some kind of financial implications at the state level, something probably relatively significant. There we go. Thank you. And I just want to say that we've been through hardships in the past. We know how to handle these issues, and we've been through a number of hardships in various forms. We've been through the fiscal crisis. We've been through strikes and budget cuts, and we've been through McCleary. So we're prepared, and we're capable of making through this. I would like to do just a brief shout out. We have a whole host of very bright and dedicated finance professionals who they have their finger on the pulse as to what's going on. Every one of them has their own specific area that they're monitoring and tracking, and then we're meeting on a very regular basis, weekly at least, to talk through the implications of what we're seeing and what we need to be watching out for. So please know that they're all working hard on behalf of our students and trying to prepare for what's to come. We also know how federal stimulus has been handled in the past and what we can expect with that. So there's a little bit of a leg up as we're seeing these federal resources allocated out to us. We have heard about mid-year reductions from the state. I think the timing is somewhat questionable. I've heard as early as June and as late as October, November, December, that a special session may be brought back forth where a mid-year reduction might potentially be in order. The June and the September forecasts will show the severity of what will happen over the next 2 legislative cycles. But the funny thing, I've heard estimates anywhere from $1 billion to $8 billion of state impact. Now, a good portion of our revenues are protected through basic education lens. However, when we look back to 2008, 9, 10, the state just simply redefined what basic education looked like. So I think that we need to be prepared and cautious and really thoughtful about what we're watching for. And we would likely see most of these impacts will affect us in future budget cycles, potentially the 21-22 and even into the 22-23 timeframes. It's important that we are proactive as best we can be, and we will push to maintain a highly effective and cost-saving operations. We're going to be frugal and thrifty and smart with our resources, but we're not going to react until there's something to react to. We don't need to go to a point of turning off everything and trying to eliminate things until we really have something to react. You'll go to that next slide for me, Tom. And I will just quickly bring up some next steps is what we're expecting as far as it relates to our budget. With all of the triaging and crisis work that we've done, it has been a challenge to continue to manage through our budget, but the team is working hard and we're digging into not only what the legislative impacts are, but also our maintenance impacts. We will see a deficit for the 2021 year, without a doubt. And we had intended to see a deficit. We knew we would have a deficit probably for many years to come, just given the nature of less funding and higher costs as our natural state. So we'll be bringing forth to you Policy 6000. That was given a first reading in the first meeting in March, and with the emergency, we have been pushing it off just a little bit, but it's time to bring that back. We want to make sure that we're listening to what the board asked for from us and that we're providing you with those resources. And then we anticipate they'll be able to provide you with our full deficit and some strategies for how we will go about balancing that deficit in a meeting in May. From there, we would prepare for public feedback as well as board feedback, because that's important. And then finally, we would do hearings on June 25th and adoption on July 9th. We've kicked around a little bit about whether adoption on July 9th is something that we should be doing, knowing that there could be potentially mid-year cuts coming. I think that it's highly likely that the mid-year cuts aren't going to come in likely before August, and that moving in July is probably our best scenario. We would like to be able to take a break before the onslaught of whatever comes next. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Vice President Cobb.
I actually don't really have much in the way of questions, but just as a comment on the items that were vetoed by the governor, in spite of the fact that those revenues aren't going to come through, I do think that it's a positive point to note that some of that was in our legislative agenda. So assuming that the world starts to move back towards normal next January, I'm hopeful that there's some political will to keep those items on the table, because as we work to restart and to recover from the impacts of this time, we're going to need more counselors. We're going to need additional flexibility through the learning assistance program. So I do understand the position that the governor took in trying to be conservative about mitigating the impacts on the overall state budget. But when it comes to what we'll need to be at our best, it seems like those resources are going to be critical. So I'm glad that there was political will to move those efforts forward, even though we won't get to benefit from those revenues right now. So thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Leone, questions or comments?
So you started off obviously with discussing that the fund balance is one of the last things we would go in and use if needed. And this is obviously an emergency and an extraordinary event, but you've outlined many ways in which you're planning and making adjustments so that we don't have to do that. But I think it's important for all of us to realize that if it does come to the point where things are not balancing and kids are suffering extensively from whether it's lack of counseling or learning associate, the LAP funding, that we have the duty to do what our students may need and our staff may need. Hopefully it won't come to dipping into that. I think it's something that is an option as a last resort. So thank you for looking at all the other mitigating options. One question about the grant question you described. Some of the closing of schools causes us to get certain, maybe less grants returned to us because some of the services we're not able to perform, and you're looking for exemptions around keeping that funding in order to provide the service in a different way. Is that a way that all of us can understand that?
I think that's. Let me make sure I'm understanding your question. I think what you're asking me is using the money differently. Sorry, I'm trying to formulate and ask myself at the same time the same question that you're asking me. So we want to be able to. Sorry, go ahead.
If you want, I mean, so we're getting. We have money attached to grants that are related to us providing certain service. Since the schools being closed doesn't allow us to provide some of those services, so that some of that grant money will be, are the grantors going to want some of that money back, or we're trying to get exemptions to keep that in service to kids in different ways, I guess.
Yeah, we're seeking so that we don't have as much recovery, which is where they take the money back if we aren't able to spend it. We're asking if we can carry it over, or we're asking if we can take it now and spend it in different ways that are still meaningful towards the purpose of the grant, but aren't specifically what we were allowed to do with the money, and meaningful for the educational environment.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. That's it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Keating, any questions or comments?
Thank you. I have two questions. So in thinking about on a WASDA call I was on a couple weeks ago, or maybe, I don't even know, on a call many calls that we were on, there was a document that we were working from that showed what funds are constitutionally protected and then what wasn't constitutionally protected. And I think that there was some things in that I found really interesting. And what I guess I'm wondering is, as we move closer to the severity projections, wondering how we can use some of that information to help inform the public as to what funding is protected, what funding is not protected. I just wonder if that wouldn't be helpful with whatever economic fallout that continues, that will be coming for the time being. So I'm wondering, as just a outreach kind of process, wondering if using maybe Dan's office as a way to just let people know. I'm not sure if I asked that question quite right. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I know. I think what you're asking is, can we use some of that information to help develop a narrative around what's to come?
Yes.
And that sounds perfectly reasonable. Absolutely. I haven't seen that document.
I have it, and I can forward it to everyone. And And then my other wonder is, I know earlier on, I wonder about the reimbursements from from feds around food. Is there any concern about the receiving reimbursements?
Okay, I don't know if I froze up.
Did I freeze up?
So I heard your question was, are there any concerns around receiving federal reimbursements? Was there any more to it than that?
Yeah, no, around the meals that have been served.
I don't understand. I don't know that there would be. We are eligible through USDA to reimbursement of up to $6.50 if we provide 2 meals, and those are resources that are provided through the typical USDA channel.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Director Bonbright, any questions or comments?
Sorry.
Sure. I'd just like to say I was on the same call with Director Keating, and I think she's talking about the programs that are listed under basic ed versus the ones that aren't considered basic ed programs. So that's it's quite a list, and it is a little shocking when you see what's not considered basic ed, therefore not protected. So thanks for bringing that up, Dr. Keating. I'm Director Keating, sorry. So great job. I want to say thank you to the finance team, because I know they're working so hard. This has been a real moving target with things being thrown at them and changed daily. And I know we have some difficult potential choices to make in the future as we're going into the summer with kids having more school learning opportunities. If the feds continue to in the state continues to mandate daycare camps and all these different unknowns. So it's impressive that we're right on target as at the end of March, and that is a comforting feeling. That we have a team behind us that are sharp and innovative. So thank you very much. I think everyone asked the questions that I had.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I just have a couple of questions. Tom, would you please put slide number 4 up, the monitoring and tracking? All right, Rosalind, as the slide's being loaded, I have a couple of questions around services that we're currently providing. Our meal service, we're not set up to offer a summer meal program. What is the plan? It sounded to me, everything that I've heard from the governor's office indicates an expectation that school districts will continue to provide meals in the summertime. Where are we with that? And if we're going to provide meals, what's the funding source?
Right. We have provided meals over summer in the past, and there is a summer meal feeding program, which is typically used. It's not as it's probably not as robust as what we are providing currently, and it doesn't allow for the busing to be delivering foods to various locations. So we're still in the process of trying to identify what is required and then what our opportunities are to provide those services. In the situation, just to play that through, where we weren't eligible to receive USDA meal reimbursements, it would be likely levy dollars that would cover the cost of that. And then we could, if we feel that we're directed through the governor, seek FEMA reimbursement. There could potentially be state reimbursement. There could potentially be federal reserve or federal stimulus money that can be applied to those as well. So we have multiple options, but worst case scenario, in the very end, it would be levy.
And at what point would we have to switch to levy funding? It would be great if any of those sources you just named provided funding, but worst case scenario, there's no funding from any of those sources. What's the trigger for us to switch to levy?
I believe that the current approved program for distribution of meals goes through June 30th. And then at that point, any meals served after that, if they don't address the USDA piece and they aren't doing a summer meal feeding program, or we weren't eligible for our typical summer feeding program, that we would have to switch to a levy component at that point or seek additional other resources.
And is the summer meal program, is that something we run, or has that been through partnership with Metro Parks and Boys and Girls Club? Is that
Yeah, there's a lot of partners around. There's a lot of partners around that, and that's a question of, do we continue in our typical fashion? So this is part of a whole team of people on the backside of part of the EOC, Emergency Operations Committee, working to identify what are our options and what are we going to be moving forward with as we progress on with the expectations.
So I think it would be important for us, Superintendent Santorno, to begin working with Charlie Brown and our legislative affairs team to outline what those costs are. I think we're certainly receptive to continuing the feeding program. 80,000 meals a day. Kids and families obviously are taking advantage of it. It's an important resource. We have to balance that with, there's an actual fixed cost to it. I think the nutrition service workers and the bus drivers typically don't work in the summertime, so we're going to have to work through those sorts of issues. And then if there's partners, if we've typically operated the summer meal program, and Metro Parks has been a great partner in the past. I was on a call with Director Bombright earlier today with other elected officials when the president of the Tacoma Metro Parks Commission was telling us about how they've just laid off or furloughed 75% of their employees. So I just want to make certain that there is cross-government coordination, that if there's an expectation from the governor that these important services continue, that there are costs that the school district can't just eat or take out a levy, because my understanding then is there's complications with the levy funding. If there's a reduction in the collection of property taxes or a suspension in the timing of the collection of property taxes, it seems like levy and reserves, people want to just be quick to say, well, use your levy money, use your reserve money. But these are important programs that I think need thoughtful attention from the legislature. And then Tom, if you could just move to slide number 6 for my last question. Yes, thank you. So Rosalind, help me with Seb. The cost reduction from 1,059 to 1,000 per month, is that our cost of the program, or is that the reimbursement coming from the legislature?
That's both. We'll be receiving $1,000 per month for our funded employees, which we have anticipated at 1,975 employees that will receive the $1,000 reimbursement for. And then we will pay out $1,000 per funded unit, which we have 3,801. Now, note the difference is not all levy dollars it has to cover. Those include all of our federal programs or grant program funded staffs or, other externally funded staff. So there is definitely a component. I cannot tell you the dollar amount specifically that's levy related, but.
Yeah, so that's going to be an important figure because we certainly, especially in a public health crisis, want to make certain that people have access to insurance. And at the same time, if there's additional, everything is just take it out of your reserve. And so, and I guess I continue to have concerns where the legislature told us that, it's the whole genesis of McCleary, that you can't be using levy dollars for compensation, but benefits are a part of total compensation. So what I hear from the legislature is just take it out of your levy money to cover those benefits. So it's going to be important for us to understand what those fixed costs are, especially as I hear, we've seen them before redefine what is basic education. And so if they do mid-year cuts, it's likely that there's going to be more things shifted down at the local level with an expectation that we use levy dollars to cover it if it's outside of what they rescope as basic education. I just want to make certain that we've got those numbers in our heads as soon as possible, because we're going to potentially have to make some really difficult decisions. And with no certainty what's coming from the state, I don't see how we've got enough money to do everything.
Right. Thank you. And I will just say that The determination of how many staff will be funded out of our levy won't occur until we're getting closer to actually balancing the budget, when we're finished moving everyone everywhere into all the different programs and available funding that we have. So that's one of the last numbers I'll be able to provide.
Okay, and thank you, because that's going to butt up against in May, right? We have to make predictions. We got to send out notices one way or the other to teachers, right? You've got a job, you don't have a job. So, and that's the worst decision that we ever have to make. So I think having, understanding the interdependencies of these programs as soon as possible, trying to keep cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. And I think the legislature, I understand why they made the cuts, the vetoes that the governor did, is that it was new money for new programs. So if you never had it, it probably can't be, that big of an impact. I think we would argue that it was a priority for us, on our legislative agenda, because we need more LAP funding, we need more counselors in schools, but you're not going to get what you didn't have in the first place. Okay, but this second wave now, I think, is going to have potential real world consequences. And if the legislature is not, I don't see them leaning in to try to address some of these issues. I think it's going to be hard for us to maintain some of these programs going forward without a clear commitment from them one way or the other.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments for the CFO? All right, thank you, Rosalind.
Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Item number 6.4 is the first reading of our 2020-2025 strategic plan. And I'll turn it over to the superintendent in a minute. I think we had a really good conversation at our study session on this topic last week. There was a lot of constructive feedback. I think the superintendent and her team have taken that into consideration for purposes of this report. I also want to the public to put some context around why in the world is the district working on a strategic plan that is forward thinking when we're in this kind of chaotic, unpredictable world. And I think that, from a board perspective, this is our guiding light document to make certain that we have clearly identified through strategic plan goals and benchmarks the outcome that the board expects for all students in Tacoma Public Schools. So it is essential. I think that having this document in place will allow us to be more effective as a school board. But I also want to assure the public that on a daily basis, in real time, the superintendent, who is our CEO and charged with making these operational administrative decisions, is working with the school board. We know resource needs from our students and families have changed. We know the ability for our community partners who we've relied upon so heavily, that economic circumstances may impact their ability to provide the services or to participate in the future like they have in the past. That all of those things are, there's variables right now. There's not a lot of certainty. And I think through the strategic plan, what the board is seeking to do is to provide that framework and structure so that we really make the most effective policy and budgetary decisions that we possibly can, and that we are continuing to hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards for delivery of public education in Tacoma. With that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
And that was a great introduction, Director Hines. I think it says everything about how many people have come together and how the community has looked at that. And I've asked Dr. Garcia to kind of give an overview. He's been the one who's been wordsmithing and shining and editing this. So Dr. Garcia, would you please take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. Can everyone see my screen right now? The benchmark agenda. I'm going to grab a hold of this. Everyone see this? Adoption of benchmarks language.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I just a real quick pause. Our job is tonight to do the first reading, and this is the background. The Tacoma School District 2025 strategic plan is a result of the board's belief that all students achieve their full potential by participation in education experience that is relevant, challenging, and individualized. This education experience shares such common values: equity, cultural understanding, accountability, and leadership, and is designed based on the overarching goals of achievement, innovation, instruction, collaboration, early learning, safety for all students. The current consideration, the board previously adopted 5 board goals: academic excellence, partnership, early learning, health and safety, and operations, and requested benchmarks tied to the meeting the strategic plan goals that can be measured with baseline data. The proposed benchmarks will be used to measure our success. The benchmarks will serve as a foundation for the budgeting for priorities process. This is the first reading, and they are targeted at all 5 goals. And I will stop sharing my screen at this time, and I'll have Tom bring up the presentation. For those that are watching at home, we have been working together. We've got some great feedback from individual board members on language, different ways to present the information, and the baseline data. So Tom, next slide. I'll also give a caveat that the strategic plan benchmarks are not the only data that the Tacoma Public Schools and the Board of Directors looks at throughout the year to measure our progress. They are the overarching goals of what outcomes we are trying to drive. So a reminder that the first one is academic excellence. For those that are at home, you have a copy of the new benchmark proposals as well as red line copy of any changes. Next slide, please, Tom. Next slide, please, Tom. So what we're presenting to you tonight is the proposed benchmarks. You will see that in the first, because of movement, where we placed the social emotional learning and health and safety, our proposal is for the 5th grade. We would measure the percentage of students scoring at each level in state assessments, the SMART or balance in English language arts, as well as math, as well as the percentage of students scoring English language arts and math competencies on report cards. We would do the same thing for 8th graders. So we were looking to try to track, are we improving? And then instead of report cards, we would be looking at algebra or geometry and English language arts, 8th grade. Next slide, Tom. Based on feedback from the board, we recalibrated and replaced or reinserted the percentage of students of failing 1 or more classes. With the caveat, we would be looking at that data at a semester level at the 9th grade. We would be looking at the SMART or balanced English and math in grades 10 through 12. And the reason why we put it there, it changes sometimes throughout those 5 years of when it's administered and when do students take it. And so we thought it would be a better calibration of understanding that students may take it sometimes in the 10th grade or the 11th grade, but we would give you that percentage across meeting standards. For graduation, we would look at the percentage of students graduating on time, the percentage of students graduating with extended time, and the percentage of students dropping out. Next slide, please, Tom. For prepared for life after high school, we would look at the percentage of students have a verified acceptance letter into the next institution of trade school, community and technical colleges, university, military, or an apprenticeship program. We would also look at the percentage of students taking at least 1 advanced placement, international baccalaureate, running start, or CTE, dual credit, or college in the high school course. We'd also be looking at the percentage of students that had earned industrial recognized credentials upon graduation. And we are also presenting the idea that we would be measuring the percentage of students who graduate with a 2.75 GPA or higher. Next slide. Reminder, we are maintaining our language around partnerships. Next slide, please, Tom. Next slide. For partnerships, we would be measuring welcoming environments by the number of registered volunteers, both families and community members in schools, the percentage of responses for students at each level on the climate survey regarding diversity, and the number of responses for family members at each level on the climate survey regarding diversity. In an effort to measure effective communication, we would measure the percentage of responses from students, the number of responses from family members, and the percentage of responses from staff at each level on the climate survey regarding communication. And we mean each level: middle school, elementary, and high school. Next slide, please, Tom. In addition to measuring our partners supporting student success, under partnerships, we would measure the number of community-based and youth-based organizations in formal partnership with schools and/or the school district. In an effort to measure engaging families and parents, we would measure the number of family members participating in school climate survey and the percentages of responses from staff and the number of family members responding at each level of the climate survey regarding sustained family and community engagement. Next slide, please, Tom. Early learning, we kept our language as a goal. The board has approved it and is consistent. Next slide, please, Tom. And these are our proposed early learning benchmarks. Next slide, please, Tom. For preschool, we would be looking at the number of students being served in preschool programs. For kindergarten, we'd be looking at the percentage of students scoring at each level of the English language arts competencies on the report card, and the percentage of students scoring at each level of math competencies on report card. And we would be looking at that first grade, second grade, and third grade as well. Next slide, please, Tom. I mentioned the second and third grade. In addition, at the third grade, we would be looking at the standardized test scores of English language arts and math on the SMART or balance assessment. Next slide, please, Tom. Our revised goal around safety is now health and safety, and we will create and maintain healthy and safety learning environments that promote excellent academic achievement. Next slide, please, Tom. And here are our proposed benchmarks for health and safety. Next slide, please, Tom. Newly revised, all schools would we would measure each school will complete and publish a summary of their annual social emotional learning plans. For third and fifth grade students, we'd also be measuring the percentage of students participating in one or more community-based extended learning opportunity. For 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade students, we'd measure the percentage of students completing the Healthy Youth Survey. For middle school and high school, we'd also measure the percentage of students enrolled in one or more extracurricular activity. Next slide, please, Tom. In addition, for grades 3 through 12 with our climate survey, we'd look at the percentage of students completing the climate survey, the percentage of elementary, middle school, and high school students completing the climate survey, and the number of elementary and middle school and high school family members completing the climate survey. Under the idea of exclusionary discipline, for 3rd, 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, and 12th grade students, we'd measure the percentage of students with no exclusionary discipline, suspensions or expulsions. Next slide, please. Our new goal adopted this fall of operations, we will focus on effective and efficient business practices to ensure academic success. Next slide, please, Tom. The proposed benchmarks for the first one under information technology, the percentage of students with access to a computer. For business services, the annual percentage of fund balance maintained. For human resources, the annual percentage of all staff retention. For maintenance, the annual percentage of work orders completed. And for food service, the percentage of students who receive a meal from TPS. Next slide, please, Tom. Just to remind you, when we look at how we look at our results, we filter results to understand our disparities and making sure that we're reaching. We look at race, poverty, gender, region, ELL, and special education. Next slide, please, Tom. And just these are our adopted core values, what we believe. There are no suggested changes in these. Next slide, Tom. Once again, for those that are home, what our vision is and our mission. Next slide, please, Tom. So that is our proposed first reading of benchmarks. And I believe the board may have some commentary, questions, and suggestions.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Appreciate the presentation. Questions or comments? Vice President Cobb.
Thank you, President Hines. First, I really, just as a comment, I really love the pictures in this slide deck. I felt like it accurately reflected the images of the district that I have in my head, so I appreciate that. First question, in thinking about the partnership goal around the number of formal partnerships, one thing that occurred to me is a question about whether moving forward or if right now we collect information on the partnership agreement or collect anything anywhere about which partnerships map to our strategic goals. Because I can imagine having the breakdown too of the partnerships that are working toward academic excellence or early learning or health and safety. And that would be a good layer of information on what has previously been just one number. So just that, I offer that as a refinement of that benchmark to consider if we can. Then a question I had about preschool, is that number of students or percentage of students in district-run preschools or preschools overall?
So a couple of quick things. That is the district's number run preschools.
Okay,
so
that's what I thought.
And then a big shout out to Ms. Catherine McCarthy. She is responsible for those, making sure those presentations have photos in front of us. And then you brought up a good point is in our monitoring reports, we give you deeper layers of data when we look at the benchmark. So when we're adopting tonight, we're looking, or not tonight, our first reading is are these the right benchmarks? And then from there, we could also then say, what are the subsets of materials that we want to see from there after you've identified that? Director Bonbright had some great feedback, and I apologize, I didn't articulate this the first time, is we pulled off the priority benchmark status for some of the benchmarks because you folks haven't had a chance to even identify the benchmarks. And so we would also be looking at establishing priority benchmarks after the benchmarks are adapted, as well as baseline data. So we didn't include baseline data because we don't know if these are the benchmarks that you're going to approve.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question was related to the point on the operations goal around access to a computer. Is that district provided device or in general? What's your assumption on that one?
Our intent was district provided.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Great, thank you. Director Bonbright, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Wow. Let's see. The first one was in early learning, I believe. And yeah, in early learning. And, I'm really, really proud of the work that Tacoma Public Schools has done in social emotional learning. And we've seen the demonstrated positive impacts as kids have aged into the older levels. And I know we were focused on, K-5. And I'm wondering what I feel in the early learning, the two things that are kind of missing. One of them is I know it used to be in here, and I've had a conversation with Dr. Garcia about this, but they took out the WA Kids information that was, sort of the baseline tracking information. I understand why, but it just seems to me in kindergarten especially that what we're tracking is academic. And so if I'm thinking about, we know now how kids are coming in and, ready to succeed, et cetera. Really it would be great if we had some, a benchmark of some kind for social emotional learning in K-3. So it's not just academic that we're tracking kids on. It's also how they're doing socially and emotionally. And I think I'm not exactly sure what that would be, just that it would be good to have one. So that's a suggestion up for comment and conversation with the board and with the staff that works on whole child SEL stuff, I would assume. So that would be one, because I think if that's where we're going to have, if we can have the social emotional success and excellence in the pre-K years, I mean in the pre-K to 3 years, then middle school and high school will have less and less problems with discipline and other issues. My second point is around goal 4, which is health and safety. And I, again, am thrilled to see that now all schools, not just those K-5, will be doing a summary of annual social emotional learning plan. I think that's an excellent beacon for the positive future of expanding, how students are going to be engaged in their ability for self-management and to deal with stress and anxiety. And that actually leads to my big policy suggestion for the health and safety one. And that's having some sort of a benchmark on mental health status. I don't, again, know exactly what that would be. There's lots of things I can think of that would be, could give us some indications. But I think, especially when we've just finished the 10 student listening sessions on health and safety, on mental health in our high schools, and middle schools, that I feel like we need to think creatively about how we can track some benchmarks around how we're doing around the mental health of our students. It's complicated. So anyway, that was my other suggestion. So, and then my last one was on goal 5 around operations. We talk about information technology, the percent of students with access to a computer. And while I know it's not something tangible that we are responsible for, I also thought I'd add access to the internet, because I think, I know there are ways that you can be functional with a computer, taking it back and forth to school, but having the internet makes it a more robust tool. And I was thrilled to hear the superintendent say, when she started out today, that they were working on partnerships that may be able to bring that to a reality, to have internet access for all of our students. But at this point, it was just a thought to throw into the mix. So that would be it from my thinking.
All right, thank you. Director Cohen, any questions or comments?
I've got a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I echo many of your concerns or questions to clarify specifically around the access to computers. So you said it's a TP at Tacoma Public Schools computer that you're measuring. Other things I think we should consider are, there are some kids with laptops already. Making sure that they're compatible with the learning platforms that we have, of course, would be important. So it may be too messy to try to have those kids bring them in, confirm they work, but eventually trying to get to a point where we are to a one-to-one device to kid at secondary level, or at least at high school level. But how many years down the line can we get to that as some kind of goal? So something to consider there. And your comment about internet access, yes, is important. There are ways to download data onto the computers when you're in school, the relevant things that kids are going to be working on. And they don't have to have internet, though we would like to get the internet, of course. I'm not saying we don't need that. My comments around the health and safety questions, or not questions, but the benchmarks, realizing, yes, they are not the only ones, and these are subsets of materials. I think to Director Bonbrett's question about how to measure mental health, we're not the only ones responsible for someone's mental health, or many of these other components we're trying to measure. So there are questions within the Healthy Students Survey that are related to just percent of kids that have thought about suicide, percent of kids that have attempted. But again, we don't have complete control over that, but there are subset questions in there regarding things like, is there an adult you trust that you can talk to? And one of the subsets of that is an adult at school. So there are some questions already in that survey that exist, similar to there's questions around, have you been taught about suicide prevention in schools? That already exists in that survey. Have you been taught about drug and alcohol avoidance in schools? So I would like to see some more, maybe we can consider some more specific language around how to measure those in our benchmarks. The sleep hygiene question is not, again, we're not in control of how much sleep kids get. Things are changed now regarding sleep, I realize. I think it's still important to think about 5 years out. This is a long-term plan to think about how we measure, if we do a sleep hygiene campaign, how much sleep are kids getting? And there are questions around that in the Healthy Kids survey already. So I think those are the main ones I wanted to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Keating, any questions or comments?
I just have, others have already talked about broadband connectivity, and I'm excited to hear whatever announcement is coming from the superintendent, because I know that engagement right now is such a difficult thing for students who we just don't really know quite how many students don't have access or what that access really looks like. So given that we don't know what the future brings in terms of school learning environments and going into the fall, so I'm very interested in that and learning more. And then the only other thing, a notice I had around goal 4 around health and safety in the categories of race, gender, region. I'm wondering about how we also track LGBTQ students, given that the risks and disparities that they face. So that would just be a consideration that I would like to have more, just to maybe find out how else we're going to be, how data is going to be collected on that student population as well.
Okay, thank you. So we meet again on May 14th. That will be the next business meeting, the second reading and the formal adoption of the strategic plan. So this is the last time we will be together publicly. I think it's important for us to reach consensus on some of the issues that were raised in order to provide direction to the superintendent so that she can prepare the final draft so that we can vote on May 14th. Dr. Garcia, did you capture the notes from the board members?
I attempted to, so if offer me a little grace if I didn't capture everything, okay?
I took notes also, so between the two of us, we should be okay.
Thank you.
So
my recommendation, I just want to make certain that I'm on the same page with my colleagues, is that we just succinctly work our way through the list so that at the end of this meeting, the superintendent has clear direction as to what to do in order to finalize the presentation, and to try to eliminate us on an individual basis between now and May 14th, reaching out and providing individual feedback, which puts her in a tough position of, if it's not consensus driven, it's really difficult for her to decide whether that goes in or out of the plan. So hoping to get that done right now and walk through this list. And I do appreciate, I asked at the study session last week for board members to really use this week as a work week. And I think you can see there's been a lot of thoughtful work done in advance of this meeting, and it's reflected in the plan that was provided. And then certainly these follow-up questions, a lot of thought and specificity. So let me do it this way. Is there anybody that's not willing to quickly walk through this list to reach consensus? Hearing none, let's walk through this list and reach consensus. Superintendent or deputy superintendent?
okay, first and foremost, I didn't hear any recommendation of anything could go away. So I guess I'm making sure that, the proposals are being added would be assumed that if there's consensus that nothing's going away, it's an additional benchmark that is being proposed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe that assumption is correct.
Okay, under early learning, the comment or the suggestion that we heard is bring back some recommendations on how to measure SEL K3. That is the early learning that we heard. Under operations, the clarity around district provided device.
Dr. Garcia, let's take these one by one. I think that'll be the most direct way. So if you would just pause for a moment, and I have a clarifying question. How have we been measuring social emotional learning for that demographic? Is that in WA Kids, or have we just not been collecting that data?
In WA Kids, there is elements of social emotional learning for kindergarten students.
And will we continue to administer WA Kids?
Yes.
And could you provide that back in a monitoring report?
I'm not sure I understand your question, sir. I
Do we
apologize.
need to identify a specific benchmark for that? Or do we, and I want Director Bombright to weigh in, but what I heard her intent was to make certain that we weren't losing sight of where kids were in that age range with their social emotional learning. Is that going to get reported to us if we don't have a benchmark? It's the only way we would learn about that is if we had a benchmark.
No, I think the questions at the table, or the way I understand it is does social emotional learning raise up to a level of a suggested benchmark of in K through 3? So we publish WA Kids data. The community publishes WA Kids data. I thought I heard Director Bombright say K through 3 SEL. That we don't publish first, second, and third grade SEL data at this point.
Is there a reason why we have it?
Pardon me?
Is there a reason why we have not?
Well, the board, when we talk about publishing data, the benchmarks serve as what we make public for public information. There are several reasons why we wouldn't publish all data. The amount of time that you have to look at monitoring reports, you've chosen over the course of time to focus and say, these are your priorities to look at. We've looked at social learning plans in K-5, which would have addressed where the community could see where does each school look to support kids in their school social emotional learning.
Right. Director Bombright, did you have any additional questions or comments on the topic?
No, I did want to clarify that my intent really was to get the picture of WA Kids as the baseline of where they're coming in, but then how do we progress through when they were involved in Tacoma Public Schools, what's happening in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade in their social emotional development. And that's what I'm thinking is a priority for helping, kids deal with anxiety and all the other issues that we're seeing in classrooms. And we know that their development in the earliest years isn't just academic. As a matter of fact, potentially the most important part is their social emotional. So I just would love to track it if we can.
Thank you. Vice President Cobb, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I have a comment. So I understand too that WA Kids, one of the 6 domains that are assessed when kids are coming in gets at social emotional development. But statewide, and I'm not sure if in our district there isn't a comparable assessment at kindergarten at the end of, you can use WA Kids again, but first grade, second and third grade, there isn't a common assessment for social emotional learning. So my question on this one is, I agree with the value of understanding student social emotional development, but getting into this, I would wonder what SEL skills and competencies we're prioritizing. So if we're using the big castle domains of social awareness and self-management, all those big domains, within that, there are other competencies. So what are our priorities? priorities with regard to social emotional development for all kids if we're going to be committing to collecting data on these and measuring. And then it seems like then we need to have the standard curriculum across all schools and some standard way of assessing their development on those competencies. So again, I agree with the value, but I think it's a lot of conversation maybe that would need to be had about first through third grade about which specific cell competencies and skills we're aiming to ensure all kids have. And then how would we go about which tools would we use to gather that data? That's just my initial thinking about it, about adding at this point. But I do agree with the value of formalizing our expectations or aspirations.
One of my concerns too, which I agree that getting common assessment on students' progress in social emotional learning, but it tends to be a one-on-one test, a one-on-one assessment. It's not, with that age group, you can't just give them a paper and pencil test or anything. It has to be an individual screening. And our K-3 teachers are already really, really stretched with the amount of one-on-one testing they're having to do. So it might not be able, our best strategy might not be to get trend lines or something, or a pilot, because I'm not sure how much more we can expand the testing that they're doing with individual students.
I don't want to undermine the value of it. I absolutely agree with the value, but just wonder about if there's another strategy to keep an eye on kids' social emotional development in this way. So I just have questions about that. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Superintendent, what I'm hearing, I think the board recognizes the value. It sounds like maybe it's an issue of timing and sequencing, that we may not quite be ready for that as a benchmark, but we're still going to be, through WAKIDS, baselining it, and through individual K-5 individual schools with plans will give us some overview, and perhaps the work we're doing with Wallace will better position us to begin formally tracking that.
I think the work with Wallace is a real good place to be right now, and to start with that, and as it lends itself to better screening and the ability of our teachers to not have to count on a one-on-one with students, but to be able to survey their class and decide who needs more with what, that might be a better idea. And I think Josh has said this before, you're going to run into really, really, really good work that you want data on, that if we did all of it, we're not going to be able to report back on it. There's limited amount of priority benchmarks that we can give you information on.
Any questions, members? Hearing none, Mr. Bombright, are you comfortable with us putting this in the parking lot until we're more ready to decide what that assessment tool would look like for those K-3 students?
I guess so, since we don't really have anything tangible at this point that would be, other than individual assessment that we could lean on. I would like to, kind of have a commitment to be working on this, because I think it is so fundamentally important that we understand where each individual kid is in their social emotional development in those early years. It really drives their success in life. So and
I don't mean to say that our teachers aren't surveying for that information and that they don't get, they are getting that information. It's guiding their instruction and their work. It's just that we're not measuring it.
Exactly. We're not measuring it exactly the same way in every classroom. And it's just something to think about as we're developing curriculum and materials into the future in K-3. I'd love to build that in. And I know that we have a whole child approach that is actually doing that in a very meaningful way. And I'm not sure which, Dr. Garcia or Dr. Satorno, which one of you suggested a pilot or mentioned the word pilot. Maybe that's something we could do, just maybe not as a benchmark at this point.
So we are currently piloting assessments with a national group through Wallace around SEL. Those national assessments are not valid and reliable. And so we think about where the field is in putting SEL assessments to scale. It's fairly young, not that they're individual things. And so we have been cautious about bringing you something that has not been vetted yet to that level. So, we could be in a place in 6 months in a much different place. And we can spend more time talking about these things. It's definitely one of our core values. And so we will not lose sight. I rest assured that this is the very being of our fabric of our school system. So we will continue to push this. We just haven't been able to find an assessment system that would give you an accurate picture.
And okay, I will abdicate to the group. I will say, however, it concerns me that the K-12, the K-3, or the early learning components are entirely academic. So that makes me concerned.
Thank you. Dr. Garcia, what's the second item on the list?
Under operations, we talked about the clarity of a district-provided device versus just a device. And there was commentary around the desire to potentially look at internet. And I wasn't sure if that was a suggestion or an excitement to hear about some of the new work that the community was doing around internet. So I seek clarity of, are you looking for a...
Yeah. If you're going to count computers or, a percentage of students with access to computers, we would also, I think, want to know what is the percentage with access to the internet.
So I guess the question is it knowing that, are you asking us to provide internet?
No, just asking, it's a tracking to see if they have it. But maybe that's not appropriate as a benchmark. I just thought that it's such a big issue that we've discovered. It's a lesson learned from this COVID experience that maybe if we're asking about computers, maybe we can ask about access as well.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with any of that. I'm just looking for clarity from the board. So the expectation when we talk about computers is the district would build business plans and supports to provide computers to students for, to check out. So that was the clarity from you folks of, are you also looking to for the district to provide, is it to survey and find out the percentage of students, or is it to provide internet access? And is there consensus on that? That's what we're looking for.
So let me add some context. This was a part of my feedback. The original benchmark was age of device. And the conversation that I had with the superintendent and the deputy superintendent is that it was hard for me to understand the relevance of age of device without knowing the need. So maybe all of our devices are super new, but maybe we have significantly less number of devices than we need. And I think that the challenge around this benchmark. So that's why I suggested how many students have a device. I think that we are, and Director Leone alluded to this, I think it's a broader policy question that we are not currently a one-to-one device school district. So I would caution us as we're thinking about this benchmark long-term. It's almost impossible probably for any of us not to filter this through the lens of the current COVID school closure, distant learning. But we're going to have no clarity as a board on the device. And I think what happens is I think that there is I know that the Foundation for Tacoma Students is also their strategic plan. And my thought was this seemed like a good measure for FFTS from a citywide perspective, and that the number of devices could roll up into that broader number. I think it is subtle and it's nuanced, but what we're talking about, I think what I hear now in this current crisis is student access to a device. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a district issued device. And given that we're not currently a one-to-one device district, I think we have to be thoughtful around, is it for middle school and high school students? Is it for every student? How do we determine that? Is it based on financial need, or do we just do it to every student? I don't think we're there yet. But I do think we're hearing from private sector. I know I've had conversations, and the superintendent has had conversations with private sector tech companies that potentially could contribute, from nonprofits that could contribute. So my intent on that benchmark was how many kids in Tacoma have a device that's district issued that could then roll up into that broader Foundation for Tacoma students. How many kids in Tacoma have a device? And then we're not limiting ourselves to the district being the only entity that provides the device, because they're about $1,000 a piece right now through our Dell computers that we choose to give to kids. I think the policy discussions are going to have to come sooner than later on what's the outcome we're trying to achieve with having students and devices. And I would just add, I support the tracking of kids with internet access, because I've got a device, but I don't have access. I still go back and forth on, is that a school district benchmark, or is that say a Foundation for Tacoma Schools benchmark? I know that we have advocated to the state legislature and the governor's office for funding to support that need, and that our colleagues on the city council have also supported it. So I think what we're trying to, what I was trying to do is seek clarity on who is ultimately responsible for the measurement, and then is there a way that the district can roll what we're able to do up into that broader measurement? Are there questions, comments on that?
I have a comment. This is Director Cobb.
Sure, Vice President Cobb.
I think that your point about getting clear about the outcome that we're trying to achieve via device access is important. I think in this current time that we're in, where most all learning is happening remotely, the devices are really important. But in an event that we ever get to go back to face-to-face instruction, I think that the use, or the expected use by students, the expectations that teachers have, and the way that they use technology in the classroom, and establish expectations for students once we know that they have the devices, the way that they establish expectations for use at home, like, should drive the continued conversation around this, like what's the educational use case for having the device. And I really do think that this conversation starts to get into the lanes of family and family engagement and conversation too, because many families like to limit students' use of technology and computers at home. And when we talk about internet access, some parents might prefer that their students just had access to a very locked down set of portals that connect into instructional materials in lieu of having broad access to the internet. And then lastly, on the topic of internet access, it's really not, I don't know how we have conversations about student access in isolation from family access to the internet. Is it about and getting to the point about whose responsibility is it? We can't just allow one person. I mean, maybe we can, but I imagine that we're not just allowing one person in a household to get on the internet if the connectivity is there. It's really a community-wide, family-wide resource at that point. So I do think partnerships to get to the access matter. And your point, Director Hines, about is it our benchmark or the Foundation's benchmark, or I don't know, but these are just my thoughts.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments?
Yeah.
I just have a clarifying.
Sure.
So my comment was more around in thinking about internet access, was more on a broader scale, and seeming like that's not necessarily a responsibility of the district to provide. But definitely something that we are finding that is a critical element to distant learning and in our current situation. So I just wanted to clarify, my expectation in that was not that the district would provide internet access, but that this is something that I think that we have all been talking about since the beginning of school closures, and recognizing the inequities of broadband access to students and their families.
Thank you. Director Leon, did I hear you have a question or comment?
Yeah. So these inequities have been present for a long time. They're just magnified now, of course, we all know that. So I believe that we're not responsible for getting the internet access to the homes. I don't think that's something we can be in charge of or measure that we're getting it there. I think measuring if it's present or not will give us an idea of what kind of activities, learning activities a student can perform. Also, I think if there's a way to use some kind of scale, whether it's whoever has free and reduced lunch gets a school computer, other folks expecting that is an expense that the family could be able to cover. I know that's not fair for everybody, and other outside foundations being able to help maybe some of those families that cannot have access to a computer. And then there's technical questions which are in the weeds that we don't have time to talk about, like Mac or PC and which formats are being used. So those are things that the rest of our district team will have to think over. But I do think that getting to a point where at least high school students have a one-to-one device, but not next year, that won't happen, but whether we're striving to that level at some point over the next few years is something we should discuss as a board now.
When you say discuss as a board now, you mean have a one-to-one policy device conversation in this moment, or you're saying that's something that we're going to need to talk about in the upcoming months?
So I guess I bring it up is in both ways, both avenues. Is this something that we put on as a long-term 5-year goal that we would like to get to 100% one-to-one in high school in 3 years? And so that's, I'd like to hear from the board members on that.
Yeah, so I would say, certainly with these benchmarks, we set targets. And so, the timing and sequencing, the superintendent is looking for us to come to consensus on what the benchmarks are. And then she'll brief us on the targets so we understand what success looks like. And I think that there's a multiple meeting conversation that's going to have to occur around one-to-one devices and the pros and the cons and the costs. What are we getting out of it? So I think that this distant learning is making those sorts of needs more apparent. On that call earlier today, we heard with the elected officials, we heard that Pierce Transit is going to be putting routers on buses and parking them at park and rides, which is great. But is that a long-term sustainable solution? I think in this emergency, maybe that works. But now you're a family that doesn't have access to the internet that needs to get in your car and drive to the park and ride. Doesn't seem fair and equitable. So I think that these, we're asking good questions. I think it's partnership that's going to solve them. For purposes of this measurement, how do we feel about, is there a need to add the measurement of access to the internet? I think that's the question at hand.
I would say yes.
A thumbs up from Director Leone. I can see you on my Foursquare, Vice President Cobb. How do you feel about that?
I think that I'm more in favor of crafting the benchmark language to reflect a connection between the device and its use. Like something that gets at number of district provided devices that are sufficiently and that are making the point about number of district provided devices and that are sufficiently equipped for student home use or something to that effect, like linking our rollout of the devices with the mechanisms, whether it's community provided access or whether it's some commitment we're able to continue to negotiate with Comcast for the devices that we have related to hotspots, like linking our rollout, that our commitment to providing internet access to the devices that we're providing for students to use. So
what does the benchmark look like, Andrea? Director, what that means? So the benchmark, what's the benchmark?
Well, we have established right now in draft that reflects the number of students with access to a device. I'm just saying internet enabled devices, something like that, to connect the amount of the level of access to the internet to the specific devices that we're providing. So it's not two separate
Okay.
focus areas, I guess.
Okay.
And I guess I'm trying to link the devices to the academic purpose, like not just device. Right now, having a device is absolutely critical, and I think moving forward it is too. But I'm trying, and I think broadly it opens up a whole world for kids. But I'm just trying to link our accountability metrics, which I think these are, to thoughtful planning around how we use them for instruction, and then how we plan to provide internet and access for the devices that we're issuing, and how we, like Director Hines said, talk about and think about budgeting for them into the future. And I think some of a focus on internet access broadly and setting a benchmark around that is too disconnected for me from the device and the issue of the devices and the instructional approach for the devices.
Thank you, Vice President Cobb. Are there any additional questions or comments on this issue? All right, so I think Director Keating, did you have a question or comment?
I was just going to concur with Director Cobb, with Vice President Cobb, about having it connect to the educational outcomes, and just being, I appreciate the clarification of making sure that the device that is internet accessible or enabled. I can't quite remember how the language was used, but that's more of my thinking, not maybe necessarily measuring if a student has internet access, but if we're going to be providing, I think that that's an important piece, because if they have, if the district's providing a device and they don't have internet access, then that's kind of a moot point. So I think having that be clarified in the language is, I support that.
All right, thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Superintendent, Deputy Superintendent, did that help to clarify where the board is on that particular benchmark?
Yep, President Hines.
Yes, Director Bombright.
Okay, just as a point of clarification, the way I was thinking of this when I proposed it was the current one reads % of students with access to a computer. We've now talked about this and have decided that it really should say to a district supplied computer, and actually you said device, Vice President Cobb, which I actually liked better, because it may, who knows, it might be a tablet over time, which is, I don't know. So how do we put that? I was simply saying percentage of students with access to a computer and to the internet, access to the internet. So it was just merely, that's what I meant. I wasn't making a separate one. I just simply wrote down and access to the internet, because they go together. So that was all I was saying. So I'm just, if we could keep it simple like that, then was the goal.
Okay, I hear consensus around that. Is that clarified, Superintendent and Deputy Superintendent?
So when we do benchmarks, I think I hear the intent, and you're also giving us some freedom with wordsmithing. I think I hear your intent is that you want to know how many kids have access to the internet, but you're not saying district is providing all that internet access. And the subtlety is that you are in support of the district setting a benchmark to the district providing a device that is internet enabled in there.
Yes.
That you'd be welcoming. One is more of the district's being held accountable to find out how many kids have access to internet. The second is the district's being held accountable to provide a device to kids that are internet enabled.
Devices to kids that they can use, like on the internet, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? I just want to be, so there seems to be some head nodding there from those that I see. So that's enough to go from?
Yeah.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you. Couple of more items on the list, am I right? Dr.
Yes. Yep. We're going to go into health and safety. We didn't hear any feedback on academic excellence, so I'm just going to move that beyond that one. For health and safety, there was a couple of comments around finding a way to measure mental health And there were suggestions around suicide in the Healthy Youth Survey question, a connection to adult at school in the Healthy Youth Survey, and information around alcohol in the Healthy Youth Survey, and then a connection around sleep hygiene. And so the guidance would be Dr. Bonbright advocacy was around something to measure mental health. And then the other comments come from Director Leon. So some guidance around where do you want to go around mental health as a benchmark?
And this is Director Bonbright. My goal was to make it as flexible and broad as possible for you at the district to figure out exactly what it is that we could count or document. So whatever.
I appreciate that. I'm just seeking clarity.
Yeah.
So is there consensus to add another benchmark around mental health? And how specific do you want to provide that guidance?
I guess my question would be then what's the outcome we're trying to drive? We collect that data, and I know that data can be difficult to disaggregate because of HIPAA and FERPA, that there's student privacy laws and healthcare privacy laws. So I guess maybe from Director Leon, I need to hear more about the outcome. Like, we have access to that data through the survey. What would he want the outcome to be as a result of making that a benchmark?
So thank you. The outcomes that we have probably control over there are questions already in there around, did you learn in the past year, how many times did you learn about alcohol and drug prevention and how dangerous that is, and suicide prevention and resources around that. Those questions already exist in there. Those are questions that go to, did you learn about this basically in your health classes or maybe other places in school? That would be something we could measure and see if we're improving upon. We have a small portion of the pie of control around how sad, depressed, anxious, suicidal someone is. But so those are two pieces. The sleep hygiene question would be if we were to develop, and this is up to the superintendent and her team, a sleep hygiene portion of the curriculum, which exists in the health survey. How are we doing with kids' hours of sleep that they're getting? So those are my thoughts. Take some questions or more comments.
All right, are there questions or comments from other board members? Director Bonbright?
I'm beginning to think that perhaps this, kind of like the early learning one, is difficult at this point in time to capture exactly the benchmark. It is that we would want to tag consistently across all age groups and across all purposes. So again, maybe this is premature.
I'm sorry, did you have more, Director Bonbright?
Nope.
Vice President Cobb, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, my comment is, I kind of agree with the comment that Director Bonbright just made, and thinking that there might be some ways to really to do like a briefing on the Healthy Youth Survey whenever it comes out, and have like a study session on the Healthy Youth Survey to really start to, and any other data points that we have related to mental health and use of services, to really start to, this is an extension of the conversations that we've been having too, but to really start to make sense together of the data that we do have available to us, especially in the context of the strengths and limitations of that data, the response rates, and all those nuances to it too. I know this is an important topic for all of us, but I'm a little bit hesitant to include it at this stage. I do like the inclusion of the percentage of students who participate in the Healthy Youth Survey in this benchmark area, just so that is in front of us every other year when it's administered. But again, feel like there might be some interim work that we can do to get smarter about the data that exists and how we might incorporate it into our benchmarks moving forward.
All right, thank you. Director Keating, did you have any questions or comments?
I also follow the same kind of line of thinking of Director Bombright and Director Cobb. And just, it occurred to me that we just got the notes from all of our listening sessions, and I still haven't been able to read through them yet. So I think being clear on what are we actually trying, what benchmark are we setting, what are we trying to achieve, and also some of this in my head as I'm listening through the conversation, it seems like this is part of the work of our counselors and the social emotional learning. So that doesn't necessarily seem in policy to be, I'm not clear. I'm kind of muddy on what the benchmark would be. So that's just kind of where I'm at. So I guess I think that having the increased or tracking the use or the participation in the Healthy Youth Survey, and maybe we could have at a later opportunity have an opportunity to provide insight or comments on the content of the Healthy Youth Survey, especially reflecting on the listening sessions. So that seems like work that we can do in the coming months. And I'm not sure what the schedule is for the next Healthy Youth Survey. And I think that too, it'll be a reality that the information that we may want to know about based on this impact of COVID, like some of the focus might shift as well. And some of the things that we end up seeing that have impacted students, I mean, a lot of that we just don't know yet. So those are some of my ramblings.
Thank you. And I agree. I think timing and sequencing, we're not quite to the place where we want to put those into the strategic plan as formal benchmarks. I think we're tracking them in other ways. We're having policy discussions in other ways. We're going to have to make some formal decisions on bell schedule and some of those things moving forward. And until we do, I think we're probably not ready to include that as a benchmark.
So, and just to remind those at home and you folks too, is you did some great work around goals and studying mental health in some benchmarks that include elements of mental health. So the participation in the Healthy Youth Survey gives us data to look at mental health, as been mentioned before. Students' physical activity is captured in the extracurricular activities at all levels now, which is new. And then the social emotional learning of a child is also a contributor to mental health. And so those plans that schools will be developing. So although we're not ready to be have a sophisticated system to measure mental health in a specific one benchmark, rest assured that the work continues forward. It's very similar to the conversation as Dr. Bombright mentioned around early learning.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. What do we have? A couple of more on the list?
Well, I believe that we only had one other one that I need clarity. So I think we've moved through that. We've decided that so far to date, we're really just focusing in on the operations one to refine, knowing that there's other work that's going to give us information. Director Keating mentioned data around the LBGT community, and I'm not sure if that is a suggestion to apply another filter, because we could discuss that, or if it's a conversation to learn more about how we are looking at data in that filter.
I don't think I can repeat back what you just said, but the first part is what connected. Your first statement is what connected with me first. I'm just wondering about because when I saw the list of categories, it just made me think gender was in there, but then I thought about like how are LGBTQ students and their experiences and their risk factors, like how are they being tracked as well? So that was really my thought. I didn't really have a formulated suggestion other than a notice that and wondered how else are they being tracked.
Yeah, so what I would offer is a first and a thought to consider when we look at the filters, and we had this conversation, and I want to be careful with my words because it's important that we recognize in those filters, those are not all of the labels and identification codes for all of our kids. And for safety purposes, we are not able to identify certain labels or groups of kids because of the N size by the time we filter them. So, for example, we found this, we had this conversation with foster care students, for example, last meeting. What we learned is when we started to look at that data, we have a significant portion of foster care students, but when you break them down into certain grade levels and then down by schools or by regions and apply other filters, that N size becomes small enough that we're not able to report that data. So if the intent is to report that data, which is in the strategic plan benchmark, is to not to say that this is the only data that we are collecting, but this is the data that we can report. I would need to do some research about our ability to how large is that N size, and then at what point do we apply a variable that we're not able to report it.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
So with that, I think we have enough, President Hines, to go back and bring you a very similar benchmark, but with some reports and then some real guidance of, I think you guys have done a fabulous job in the last week of doing your homework of saying these are values and these are important data sets. And under that theme that not all of our work is reported in these benchmarks and not everything is important is measured here in these benchmarks, but from a public accountability and the guiding principles, these are the primary things that we're going to focus in on, and everything is connected to everything else. And we can't improve academics if we aren't focusing on social emotional learning and mental health. And we have to look at every kid, even though they may not get to a N size that is reflected in some of these categories. Is that a fair next step?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you
And
for your time.
I would add to that, just talk to my colleagues so that everybody is on the same page. You know, we've really tried to work hard as a group. Last week's study session, in the 7 days between this board meeting and last week's study session, and then taking extra time tonight as I look down and see that it's 8:08 and we still have several more agenda items. But to make certain that we now can direct the superintendent to finalize this document. And that there aren't because there's 2 weeks until we will take formal action on this. And so I guess my request is that when we leave today, we have consensus that this is the final document and that we don't put the superintendent in a position where she gets contacted by any of us individually with an inability for us to publicly make a consensus-driven decision. Are you comfortable with what we have now, and that on May 14th, the superintendent will bring for us a draft that's reflective of the conversation that we've had this evening?
Yes, and I have a question.
Sure, Director Bombright.
My question has to do with in my conversations with Dr. Garcia, my first iterations, I had a question about priorities, and he decided to take them off because we hadn't adopted them yet. So at what point are we going to go back and make and prioritize? Is that before the 14th or is that at the 14th meeting? Or would that be?
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Braun. My recommendation for you would be is to adopt the benchmarks and then allow us to create some baseline data so then you can determine priorities based on that. So I would imagine, just for context wise, because we do need to collect baseline data, we would probably come back early, late summer, early in the fall with all that baseline data completed to our best ability, and have you look at what is your priorities based on this data and where are those pieces. And then my final comment, if you folks are comfortable with that sequencing, is I just want those at home to know that each of you have spent a lot of time in the last week going through each of the benchmarks. Multiple phone calls, multiple conversations with the superintendent, us pushing, thinking, what does that look like? And no decisions were ever made, but deep homework. And so deeply grateful for each of you and your engagement in this.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Hearing no objections, then I think we have consensus on the process to move forward. We'll move on in the agenda to item 6.5, curriculum and instruction. 6.5A, approval of the application for fiscal year 2020 Head Start CARES COVID-19 grant number 10CH01190. Deputy Superintendent. Josh, you're muted.
I want to make sure that I have the right agenda. Did we miss the emergency credit waiver? Is that the next one? I might have an old one in front of me. I apologize. So I'll just move forward with this one.
Yeah.
The Deputy Superintendent, on behalf of the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, recommends that the Board of Directors approve the submission for the FY 2020 Head Start CARES COVID-19 grant application in the amount of $150,000, and if awarded, approve expenditure of funds according to accepted guidelines. Funding source, Department of Health and Human Resource or Services, Office of Head Start.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 5-0. And Dr. Garcia will be getting, the waiver is 6.5D, so we're there in a couple of more items.
I got excited. So
We're going to make you wait a couple minutes longer. Item
just
6.
like Christmas.
6.5.B, approval of the application for fiscal year 2020 Head Start CARES Summer School Grant, number 10CH01190. Deputy Superintendent.
The Deputy Superintendent, on behalf of the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, recommends that the Board of Directors approve the submission of the FY 2020 Head Start CARES Summer School Grant application in the amount of $350,000. And if awarded, approve expenditures of fund according to accepted guidelines. Funding source, Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Head Start.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
I so move.
Is there a
I
second?
second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 5-0. We're almost there, Dr. Garcia. Item 6.5C, approval of Tacoma Public Schools 2019-2020 school year COVID-19 impacted grading protocol.
The superintendent recommends that the Board of Directors review the proposed 2019-2020 COVID-19 impacted grading protocol and approve this protocol.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve? Is there a motion to approve?
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting. Yes, I motion.
Thank you, Lisa. Is there, Director Keating, is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Vice President Cobb. Superintendent Santorno, would you please provide us some context? I know that we've been hearing literally since we closed schools. How are we going to be graded? And I think we've all been patiently waiting for OSPI to provide the guidance, and that's come out. Would you put some context around that for the board and the community?
Well, the context you started with is primarily what I was going to begin with. This has been unprecedented times. How many times have we said that? And we have been working as a staff, a leadership team, to build a protocol for grading during this really different time. We have been waiting because there was talk back and forth about whether this was going to be a local control issue or whether it was going to be controlled by the state. So we've been putting plans in place. We have had a team working together, the high school principals, the director of secondary instruction, and TEA, and a lot of staff have been working together to talk about what this looks like. I'm sure what I'm so proud of is with all of the board of directors, because I know you've heard several different opinions about this issue. Your emails have run the gamut, just like mine, with everybody who has a different idea about how this should be done. I've asked Dr. Garcia, you have a heavy load today. We should pay you more for today, Dr. Garcia, because I want him just to try to go over an overview of what we considered, what our personal guidelines are, what the guidelines from the state were, and how we came to what is our recommendation for how we grade this period of time from March 16th to the end of the year. Dr. Garcia?
Thank you, Superintendent Arno. Board of Directors, just a quick overview, and you've said most of this, but we've been out of school 5 weeks. We're in our 6th week. One of those weeks was spring break. During that time, we have no one in the state knew how long we were going to be out. Teachers didn't know, families didn't know, governors didn't know, state superintendents didn't know, you didn't know. And we've had a lot of different messages during that time. Those messages started off of that first week was treat school like it's a spring break this first week. We're going to get some guidance from the state and from others. That was the message from the governor and OSPI. We got a message out that, and communications from families got that we would not be grading students during this time. And to focus in on redoing work in the unknowns. That was the first couple weeks of messages. And then we went, and teachers and families and students and all of you folks got a message that said, now we're going to focus in on new learning, but we're not going to grade. We're just going to assess. And then the message came this week, and simultaneously during that, as Superintendent message shared with you, we've been working with staff, our TAA partners, principals, colleagues from other districts, reviewing things like the higher ed recommendations, the NCAA, impacts on WIA. And we were Tuesday going to propose to you a proposal for how your adoption around grades. And OSPI on Tuesday, and they had been transparent. They weren't sure if they were going to provide guidance or activate their emergency rule authority. Late Tuesday afternoon, they activated their emergency rule authority, and as part of that, gave guidance that all school districts in the state of Washington must follow. We had some shared values, and all the way through our process, in our drafts and recommendations, we had values that we had to do no harm to students. It's important for everyone to know that there is no one way to do grading. And your recommendation tonight, we wanted to ensure that students earn credit. That was very important to all the parties involved, that students earn credit, that we did not just leave it as an open door. That students could only improve their grades. That means that if they chose to continue to work on their grades, which we are asking, and we've been asking, and teachers have been trying to engage, that students' grades as of March 13th could not go backwards. So if I had an A March 13th, I couldn't be penalized because of COVID and somehow get a B or C or a D. We were very sensitive in our recommendation that we recognize that kids and families in the fall could not be asked to take on a full load and continue to do double work from this semester. So we built a recommendation that students would earn credit and not be asked to do more work in the fall as a result of COVID-19. We looked at knowing that kids are mobile, that they change schools, they change towns, our kids change states, and oftentimes even change countries. And we had to bring a recommendation that addressed those factors. We had to look at providing a functional way for staff and students to partner on the next 6 weeks on how they could improve grades. And so we had to build a system or a recommendation for you to consider that addressed a practical solution for that. We knew that even though we got the guidance Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and it's Thursday, that we had to be immediately responsive, and we're asking you to be immediately responsive because whatever is decided tonight, we are running out of time to implement something in partnership with our kids and our teachers. And then we knew that we had to bring you a recommendation that maintained respect and compassion for the situation and integrity for the grading and what the grade means for a child during this situation. Tom, I don't know if you can bring up the recommendation. It should be noted that we had to follow certain guidelines, and those guidelines are also published out there. And the last piece is all grades in Washington State. There are some caveats, have to meet some certain thresholds, and I'm not going to go through all of them. One of them is no student in Washington State can receive a failing grade. So that is an important fact that folks should know while they're at home. And all students will get on their Washington State high school transcript a indication that these are COVID impacted grades. The state hasn't shared what that will look like, but that is a notion there. So how are we doing with that, Tom, or should I bring it up? Okay. I'm just now hoping that I bring up the exact multiple right draft here, Tom. You're putting a lot of pressure on me. All right, let's see if I can share my screen. How are we doing? Everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay,
Good
so
job.
our recommendation. Sorry, Carla, go ahead.
Good job.
Thank you. Our recommendation, we're giving you some background. We're going to start with grading, reporting the high level pieces of what will students kindergarten through grade 5 get. The state also recognized that if you are a standards-based grading system, you could not give a 1. We will be asking our students, we will be assigning grades based off of their work. And these are end of the year. So some students have already met standard, exceeded standards in certain prioritization standards, and their grades would reflect that. If a student hadn't met the standard, they would receive a 2. If there is evidence by the teacher that they have met standard, they would receive a 3. And if there's evidence that they've exceeded the end of the year standard, they would receive a 4. And so the real difference there is none of our students will be receiving a 1 on their report card. All students, unless their parent requests by state law and the emergency rules, will advance to the next grade level. I'm going to move on to the middle schools and high schools. Now, when the state provided guidance, there may, just for those that are at home and board members, they did say if you're middle schools, and the intent there is if you're on a standards-based education system, you don't use letter grades, you don't have to use letter grades. We do not use a 4-3-2 model in our middle schools. We use a traditional A, B through F schedule. And so our recommendation is to continue to maintain that schedule. We are recommending tonight that you look to adopt an A through D schedule. And what that means is Fs are no longer a part of the process. So if a student is currently getting an F, and they didn't engage anymore, or they couldn't engage anymore, or they couldn't show evidence that they are improving their grade, they would be assigned a D as required by these emergency rules. All students would be expected to continue to work with their respective teachers to earn and improve a letter grade. Students will work with individual teachers to establish criteria for improving their letter grades. So we have 6 weeks where students would get assigned assignments, and like they naturally would during this time. and they would work on to provide evidence for that. Our teachers are flexible in what could that evidence look like, and they have been already working on providing feedback, knowing that distance learning is where we are today. This all means that a student's grade can be improved depending on the work completed and applicable standards met or not met. Student grades cannot be lowered from March 13th. Student work must be completed by June 3rd for Sammy Soda and IDEA seniors, and by June 11th for the for all the comprehensive high schools. And for students 6th through 11th grade students, they must complete their work by the last day of school. Students will earn traditional letter grades in our recommendation A through D. No student will earn a failing grade. Letter grades will impact a student's GPA. Students agree to make weekly contact with respective teachers and will complete their assigned work. All students should be checking their grades on a regular basis. They can call in, they can make contact with emails, or they can use the hack system. It should be noted, although the OSPI said that there could not be pass-fail options, that all school districts must use a letter grade. There are some class codes, and they are not traditional classes, such as an advisory or a TA, where letter grades were never assigned from the first place. All those students would be a P. This is very important to note. All high school courses and those high school credit-bearing courses taken in the middle school are placed on a student's permanent high school transcript. Parents can elect not to include credit-bearing courses on a high school transcript if the courses were taken in the middle school. So although these grades and this grading scale is assigned, parents still have choice for all middle school classes that are high school credit bearing. And then all senior awards are based on the first semester cumulative GPAs. That is a normal practice inconsistent to where we are today. So no matter what is applied or a student earns right now, it would not impact their ability to be the valedictorian, the salutatorian, top 20, and other senior impacted awards. So that is our recommendation for tonight. And one other note, I think I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions and allow the board to have dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. I have a couple of questions. So when we're talking about an A, B, C, or D, and that students can't earn an F, so if they were passing the class, well, if they had an F on March 13th, that's going to get moved to a D. How many students are in the ABC range? Do you have any sense of what that represents as of March 13th?
I can give you an approximate as long as we are all agreeing that that's an approximate number.
Sure. Ballpark.
So, when we look at the idea of maybe like a C minus through A, approximately 75 plus percentage, 75, 76% of the total grades are already at a C minus or higher at the secondary level. That's middle school and high school.
Okay, and then we know that the students that were failing will be moved to a D. I guess as I've wrestled with this, over the last few days, I want fair and equitable, and I've been trying to think through how do you avoid grade inflation? And so what I'm hearing back on this A through D is it gives some latitude to our teachers to provide assessment based on student performance up to March 13th as the baseline, and then student performance between now and June 16th. So this seems like a fair and equitable way to do that. And then just confirming, this is, you in your background explanation, we've had 3 different periods of time, this in our 6th week of different guidance from OSPI. So I just want to clarify what's under consideration for the board this evening is how we're going to grade the second semester of the 1920 school year. That this is not necessarily the grading schedule or grading scale going forward, because we don't know what the summer months or next fall and the next school year will entail, that we're really thinking about how to do the assessment for the second semester of this school year, and specifically between March 13th and June 16th, the end of school.
That is accurate. This is a proposal is a short-term policy adjustment for the second semester only of grades.
Okay, thank you. Vice President Cobb, did you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I have several comments, so I'll try to be succinct. I appreciate all the work that has gone into this proposal and all the feedback that has been gathered from stakeholders. But when I think about it, I just am not comfortable with an A through D scale at this point. There are a few reasons for it. I think that one of them stems from just the expectations that students had when they started the quarter. They expected that they'd be here all year. And I think that in a lot of our schools and in a lot of our classes, kids have multiple opportunities throughout the end of the year to turn in assignments to keep making up their grade. So I just think that if a student ended on March 16th with a D or D minus and isn't able to do a whole lot from now on, they miss out on the opportunity to engage with their teachers and other supports in the building to the extent that they would have to get that up beyond a D. So I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with the D. Also, in general, I think that the state took off the failing option from all of us. So it already knocked out the minimum threshold on where we could go. And I just don't feel comfortable that a D minimum threshold goes far enough to adjust for all the disruptions that we've had in the system. Educators are getting used to this new format. Students are trying to get up to speed on how to engage and what they should be doing. And as we've already mentioned, there have been a lot of different expectations set over the course of the last 3 to 4 weeks about what grades and assignments and feedback, what all of this was going to mean. And then I could say more in the context of higher ed. I've been on that end of being an admission counselor. So I do think that when you look at a transcript and all of these grades are going to be noted that they were COVID impacts, admission counselors and people who are reviewing these transcripts are going to make assessments about what an A means, what a B means. They're going to probe on what were district's policies. So the notion that this is a special grade already changes the general context around what that grade means in the context of the others on a student's transcript. So I think that's a factor to consider too. Like that denotion means that this is a special grade. These are special circumstances. Also, there are just a lot of caveats in the guidance from OSPI 1 around like students' attendance can't impact their grades. That's a clear statement in the guidance. So there's just so much that's changed around the context for grading. I just don't feel like a D goes far enough to adjust for the changes in our context and our circumstances. And I'm very liberal on this decision, but knowing where my colleagues stand from having individual conversations with you, I would be more comfortable with an A through C policy, but I wouldn't support tonight an A through D proposal. So that's just where I land. And just as a clarifying question, I understand because the OSPI took off failing as an option, all of our classes that were either pass or fail all default to pass. So in my experience as a student taking a pass or fail class, in the background, there was some calculation around what a pass meant. I don't remember if that was a D or better, if it was C or better, but I am curious about that in the pass-fail context. Is there a percentage point where a student has to meet in most classes in order to get that pass or fail? And how does that line up with an A through C policy or A through D, just out of curiosity? But a big picture, my position right now is I'm not comfortable with A through D and would feel more comfortable with A through C. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bombright, did you have any questions or comments?
Well, I think Director Cobb actually succinctly and articulately said all the things that I was feeling. And I also propose an A through C range. I just feel like it's a fairer approach. And I know it's getting late, so I'll just leave time for other folks to give their input.
Thank you. Director Keating, did you have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you. I also, in thinking about this, we have not had a lot of time to really process. The one thing I keep wondering about with the circumstances that students are facing, I worry about the students that got the message in the beginning that this is optional work. And then as everything is pivoted, now with it being graded, I think I worry about the kids that have disengaged, whether they've disengaged because they don't think it matters or because they have family circumstances or access issues, learning issues. I just worry about the implications in the equity of, I share the sentiment with Vice President Cobb around a D feels like, it feels like there's a lot of things that aren't taken into consideration. And I know that a lot of work has gone into this recommendation. And so I just feel I feel very conflicted about, it feels like a really critical decision to be made with a lot of variables, unknown variables, students having to be in circumstances that they've never been in, to be learning in ways that they didn't have before. There's just, I just feel, I would support an A through C, and I feel conflicted about an A through D as I have thought about this and talked with my colleagues and just considered the equity implications, and that, I mean, there's just a lot of students that I think that aren't engaging or can't. And so so those are just some of my thoughts about it.
Thank you. Director Leon, did you have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate the hard work that the superintendent and all of her staff have gone through, as we heard, having multiple points of discussion with everyone from all the educators within our system to outside, incorporating parent comment into that too, I'm sure. So this is a difficult topic because it is so important. I think the equity piece is the part that we're all discussing, as how these kids, a significant number of kids, whether they are not engaging because they're unable to from all the social barriers that they have, or if they're choosing not to, that is a judgment that we're unable to make. And I don't think it's fair for us to make that judgment on these kids that will not be able to bring a D up to a C or further. So I'm troubled by that. And I know our teachers are reaching out to the students as much as they can. But we're still going to have a significant number. What that number is, I don't know. No one really knows that are unable to engage but want to. In my estimate, just from talking to my patients, because many of my patients fall in these categories, that we're talking about somewhere in the 20% range. But obviously, I have no hard data on that. So I worry that we're potentially harming a lot of kids in that way. And as was mentioned already, teachers weren't prepared to teach this way before. Students didn't have the expectations of doing this type of learning. I think some of the other models that have been that are being considered out in the community of only an A is too far on this. I think we need to stimulate some engagement and learning around how the students engage with us with education, and also the teachers are learning more and getting better at this as time goes on. So in order to have this potentially be projected into the following year, we know we're not making a decision on that right now, but I have strong suspicion that we're going to be in some type of remote learning environment, whether it's like this or a version of this in the coming year also. And our decision now can be different than our future decision. The most equitable thing I feel like is to have an A and a B category, A through B and not even a C category at this point, because I feel like it's too difficult to have kids go from a D or even a C, potentially up one grade. So this is very hard, and I've been wrestling with it too. Big wrestling match for all of us, it sounds like.
Ready, thank you. Superintendent, Deputy Superintendent, you've heard from each of the 5 of us. Can you provide some context around what those recommendations are? I guess the sense that the board has, I think there's general consensus. I guess, well, let me express it through my lens. So I think we've all been conflicted. We've all talked to one another individually. We've been wrestling with this. We've been looking at what our colleagues in other districts are doing around grades. I came at this from the perspective of wanting to give teachers the broadest range of assessment possible, given these unusual circumstances, trusting their judgment, because we don't know, just different teachers and different students have engaged differently. I hear a consensus that an A through C, are there limitations about not having the latitude for teachers to use Ds? Do you have any concerns about teachers having a more limited grading scale for this semester, Superintendent or Deputy Superintendent?
Most of our conversations around, and Josh, you can tell what you talked about. I think our conversations were trying to avoid any kind of a grade inflation and to take a student who hadn't done, and it would be different if it wasn't, you didn't have any ability to engage. And the other misunderstanding, I think, is that you could have done nothing from the time March 16th was till now, and you still have a concerted, you have plenty of time to bring your grade up from a D to a C. You have to just engage with your teacher and you can go from, that D to C. To be honest, even though I feel like our recommendation was sound, I don't have difficulty going from the A to I don't have difficulty compromising to the A to C. I think I don't want kids to get the idea that we don't believe that they can't make the progress, because I think they can and they will. And I'm sensitive to that, but I want to give our teachers and our staff the ability to get started on this work, and our students too.
Thank you. So procedurally then, do we need a floor amendment to adjust the guidance to reflect an A through C instead of A through D? General Counsel?
Yes, I'd recommend asking for a motion to amend the grading protocol, and then get a second and take a vote on amending. And then if that motion passes, then you can ask for a vote on the amended protocol.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion?
I so move that we amend the grading protocol to an A through C range.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
President Hines, real quick clarifying question. I just need to make sure that as we vote, is the recommendation a flat C or a C minus? There's a subtlety there that.
I think what I heard was flat C. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
I have a question also about process before we vote.
Parliamentary process?
Yes.
What is your question?
My question is if we vote on that, I'd still like to see if there's any other potential discussion for the A through B idea before we vote for this, or have that discussion afterwards once we pass an A through C. If it looks like that may pass. I'm not sure about the rules around this.
So my recommendation would be, Director Leon, if you would like to instead propose an amendment for an A through B grading protocol, then you would vote against this amendment. I think we already did. We didn't quite get a second yet, did we?
We have the second. We were getting ready to vote.
Okay, so you would vote against it and propose instead an alternate A through B. If we're going to get into that much discussion, I may just recommend that we postpone and have some additional conversation about it because.
What do you mean by postpone? You don't mean pass today, Renee? We need this today.
Okay.
My
So
idea.
I ask that we call the question.
So my thought was there need for more discussion around A through B, or was that enough? Because I was the last one to speak, to give other folks a chance to potentially think about that idea before we vote.
Well, we had a motion to adopt an A through C schedule in a second.
Yes, so at this point then, it would be, if President, if you want to call the question, then you're going to ask for a vote. And it would be only if you decide to hold the question for additional conversation about a different amendment.
Yeah, and I would assume if the amendment passes, that's the consensus of the board.
Yes.
Okay, so we're calling the question.
Can I ask a point of clarification before you call the question?
Sure, Vice President Cobb.
And prior motions and seconds, we have then been asked if there are any questions or.
It's hard to hear you.
When we've taken votes in the past, you've asked for a motion, then it's seconded, and then you've asked if there is any questions or comments. So to Director Leon's question, is that an appropriate place for him to raise comments? So,
Sure. Are there any questions or comments about the motion on the table?
So yes. Formally, my question or comment would be after since I spoke last, be any further discussion A through B support from the. So we don't hear any. We should probably go forward.
Are there any additional questions or comments on the motion?
I actually have one clarifying one. This is, and I just want to make sure, because I made the motion, that it was the rest of the package that's presented would continue. It would just be the changing of the grade level. And we didn't talk about it, but I wanted to make sure that that there are no incompletes. In many of the other proposals on the OSPI, Superintendent Raikdahl had said that you could have incompletes be an option. And my understanding is that the Tacoma Public School staff has not suggested that, because incompletes are onerous for having students next year or whatever the summer to complete. So my understanding is there will be no incompletes as an option. Is that also correct? Right. We didn't speak to it, so
Yeah, that's correct. No incomplete.
That's not in the guidance that's before us right now.
Okay, it's perfect. So I just wanted to clarify in case anyone was wondering.
Okay. All right. So the question on the table is to approve the motion that would amend the grading protocol to reflect a grading scale of A through C. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye or nay for opposed.
All right. The amendment passes 4 votes to 1. Is there a motion to adopt the grading protocol as amended?
I move
I
to
so-
adopt the grading protocol as amended.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Are there any questions or comments? Vice President Cobb.
I just want to, I voted for the amendment to A through C, but I actually want to my personal philosophy on this, given the context that we're in, is I could have been moved to all A policy for all intents and purposes. But I think in passing this A through C policy, I just want us to say again that students are encouraged to engage. Students have an opportunity to improve even beyond the C. And I wanted to raise up some language that's in the OSPI guidance currently that speaks to grading being about the priority standards that students should know in these courses. So there's a lot of nuance in the documentation. There's a lot of nuance in our proposal, but again, I just want to emphasize that this is the minimum threshold. Kids are encouraged to still engage, and there's opportunities to increase grades because by definition, all of these grades do matter for the GPA as we're passing this. So I just leave that there.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any additional questions or comments? Director Leone.
Thank you. So I appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts, and I know that I voted in the negative of this, and I've made my points clear as to why, but I do think that this is going to be a successful policy as we passed it, and I just encourage the students and the parents to do all they can, because I know we'll do. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay, is this still where I say nay? I'm not sure about the policy here.
We
Well, at
say
this point, Director Leone, you voted negative to amending to A to C. So now the motion is to approve the A through C grading protocol. So you expressed your concern with the A through C, but now that we're actually going to vote on whether or not the district is going to use the A through C, you have the choice of voting yay or nay.
I vote yay.
Thank you.
All right, so I heard 5 yays, opposed, abstention, motion carries 5-0. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the good conversation. There are rarely in our elected office are there easy decisions, and oftentimes there are really difficult decisions. And this is one of those that I would put under those really difficult decisions. I know each of us have wrestled individually and collectively around what's the right answer. And I took comfort in when we talked to colleagues in other districts, nobody has this figured out. We've got a lot of education professionals that are making their best judgment and recommendation. I appreciate the superintendent and her team for bringing this forward. It really is a trial period for 12 weeks worth of work. Inevitably, we're going to have to come back and figure out what assessment looks like going forward. But I appreciate a difference of opinion. I think that makes the outcome even better. And Superintendent, thank you for bringing this before the board, and we look forward to seeing how it plays out.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your discussion and your your willingness to engage in it. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on in the agenda. As I note, we're nudging the 3-hour mark. Dr. Garcia, it's that time. 6.5.D. Approval of a resolution of the Board of Directors, Tacoma School District number 10, regarding emergency waiver of high school graduation credits. Superintendent Santorno.
The superintendent recommends that the Board of Directors approve the resolution number 2080, authorizing the superintendent or designee to apply for and, if granted, implement an emergency waiver program consistent with WAC 180-111.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve.
A second.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? General Counsel, because this is a resolution, do we need a roll call vote?
Yes, we do.
Would you please call the roll?
I will. President Hines,
Aye.
Vice President Cobb,
Aye.
Director Leone,
Aye.
Director Bombright,
Aye.
and Director Keating.
Aye.
The resolution passes 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 6.6, planning and construction. 6.6.A, approval of the guaranteed maximum price, GMP amendment, phase 2 to the contract for Hunt Middle School. Mr. Williams.
The Chief Operating Officer recommends that the Board of Directors approve the GMP amendment phase 2, which states the guaranteed maximum price phase 2 on the Hunt Middle School project, and authorize the superintendent or designee to sign said GMP amendment in the amount of $20,549,774, increasing the contract sum from Absher Construction to $54,703,361, excluding sales tax. Funding source capital projects bond as approved by voters on February 12th, 2013 and February 11th, 2020.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion.
Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, can you provide our superintendent an explanation as to why we are amending the contract?
Yes, this is actually the second amendment to the contract. The first amendment occurred, I want to say, almost a year ago during the design phase. It was more cost efficient for the district, not only to design phase 1, but design phase 2, design the project in entirety. It saved the district upwards of $300,000. If not, we would have to stop, go through a procurement process, also potentially pick another architect and contractor. So this is a more efficient way moving forward. And now this is the second amending based on that design in entirety.
Alrighty, thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Abstention? Motion carries 5-0. All right, that brings us to item number 7, board comments and reports. Given that we're at the 3-hour mark, I'm going to use some discretion to say we're going to move past that this evening, except for one comment. Yesterday, I believe, was National Executive Assistant Day. And I just want to take a minute to acknowledge Tanya Beatty, who is the executive assistant to the board, who does an amazing job. And I know that we have a number of executive assistants throughout the school district that really are the strength behind the scenes, keeping everything pulled together. They generally quietly go about their work, and they just have such a tremendous impact. And the other 2 executive assistants that make life on the board a lot easier are Kathy Doss, the superintendent's assistant, and Brianna Jones, the deputy superintendent's assistant. Between Kathy and Brianna and Tanya, they keep us well informed. They let us know where we need to be, when we need to be there. We're always just super prepared and ready to go. So thank you to all the executive assistants in the school district, with a special thanks to Tanya, Kathy, and Brianna. Item number 8, the announcement of future board meetings. We'll be back virtually in your living rooms on Thursday, May 14th, 2020 at 6 p.m. We are scheduled for a study session Thursday, May 21st, 2020. We are keeping that on the calendar. Vice President Cobb and I, in partnership with the superintendent, will determine if there is an essential topic for that date. And then Thursday, May 28th, 2020, we have another regularly scheduled board meeting. Superintendent, do you have anything else for the good of the order?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
School board members, anybody else out there that has something for the good of the order?
I'll just
Hearing none, I'm going to assume after 3 hours, we're all exhausted. Thank you for a really thoughtful and important business meeting. We wish all of our students and staff and family continued good health, and we'll see you back here on Thursday, May 14th. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.